In the last 2 years, Estee Lauder's stock price has fallen by over 80%. And if you looked at a lot of their recent earnings reports, you would think that this is mainly being driven by losses across China. However, this is not particularly the case. So in today's video, we're going to take a deeper look at Estee Lauder's numbers, dive into the specific sections of the business, as well as the regions that are driving down the stock price. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Estee Lauder year to date is down 50%, and as I mentioned, from its all-time highs of around $370 per share till now, the stock price is down over 80%. Even over the last 5 years, we can see that the stock price has fallen by 63%. Back in 2019, the stock was trading around $200 per share. However, today it is trading around $72 per share, and its stock price has now reached levels that haven't been seen since 2016. If you only Googled Estee Lauder's earnings, you would be a little surprised that the stock has fallen this much, because they have consistently beat analyst expectations over the last 3 quarters, other than a most recent miss. They did report their earnings back on October 31st, and they came through with an EPS of 14 cents, which did beat analyst expectations by 46%. However, they were only expecting 10 cents, so that really was only a 4 cents beat. And they also came through with revenue that was basically in line, putting up $3.36 billion. Again, a small miss of about 0.25%. But that's obviously not the full story with Estee Lauder. They have struggled on both their top and bottom line numbers over the last 2 years. They peaked at a trailing 12-month revenue back in March of 2022 of $18.1 billion. However, since then, they have seen a consistent decline in their top line numbers, and their current trailing 12-month revenue is sitting at $15.45 billion. This is very comparable to the numbers that they were seeing at the end of 2019. At the end of 2019, they had a trailing 12-month revenue of $15.85 billion. So why is it that the stock price in 2019 was trading around $200 per share? However, today it's sitting at $70 per share. And you'll notice right away that these 2 most recent quarters have posted negative EPS numbers. That has to do with some one-off charges that have hit the business. But even if you were to pull those out and plug in their non-GAAP EPS numbers here, you would still be sitting at a GAAP EPS of around $2.50, which is half of what it was in 2019. Estee Lauder has cited a slow recovery across China as being one of the reasons that they have seen such a downward momentum in terms of their numbers, and this is consistent across a lot of these larger retailers. We are seeing it especially with Nike. That is one of the key companies right now that has seen a lot of issues throughout China as well. However, for Estee Lauder, when you dive into their numbers a little bit deeper, you can see that there are other problems with the business. We can start by looking at the peak of their business in 2022. Skincare was the largest section of their business, bringing in $9.9 billion, and it was growing about 4% year over year. Makeup was the second largest section, bringing in about $4.7 billion, growing at 11%. Fragrances bringing in $2.5 billion and growing at 30% year over year. There's a consistent trend here of seeing growth across all of these sectors, as well as very strong numbers in their skincare. In 2023, the business started to decline. They saw a 17% drop in their skincare business, now bringing in $8.2 billion, down around $1.7 billion year over year. Makeup also declined by about 3%, and fragrances was basically flat. And this trend continued into 2024. They saw a decline of around 4% in their skincare business, down to now $7.9 billion of revenue. Their makeup also declined by 1%, fragrances up 1%, and hair care down 4%. So a business that was once growing across all of their sectors has now seen a continual decline. And China's getting blamed for a lot of this decline in revenue. However, on Estee Lauder's earnings, you can see a breakdown of where exactly this revenue is coming from. And in 2022, this is how the numbers looked. From the Americas, they were bringing in $4.6 billion. That was up 22% year over year. Europe, the Middle East, and Africa was bringing in $7.7 billion, up 11% year over year. And Asia Pacific, which includes China, is bringing in around $5.4 billion, down around 1% year over year, again, as of 2022. And in 2023, this is how those numbers broke down. They saw a 2% decline in their Americas business, now down to $4.5 billion. Their Asia Pacific business fell by about 4%, now down to $5.2 billion. However, in the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region, they saw a 19% decrease year over year in their revenue, down to $6.2 billion. This weakness does appear to be slowing down because here in 2024, they are seeing 1% growth in the Americas, now sitting at $4.6 billion of revenue. Europe, the Middle East, and Africa is down around 1% year over year, $6.1 billion of revenue. Asia Pacific region is now sitting at $4.9 billion. That is still in decline, down around 6% year over year. So as we look at these numbers, the biggest problem for Estee Lauder is not necessarily in China. Yes, they're not getting the growth numbers that they would hope for in that region. However, when you look at Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, that is where their biggest problem is coming from. From 2022 to 2023, they saw their revenue in these areas fall by around $1.5 billion, down around 19%. That is a massive drop. That's not to say that China isn't having an effect on these numbers, because they are. Because one of the things that falls into these categories is travel retail. When you think about travel retail, that is Estee Lauder stores that are within airports that bring in revenue as people are kind of captivated sitting in airports waiting for their flight. They will go shop at these makeup stores like Estee Lauder and buy their products. And that is a significant portion of Estee Lauder's business. And one of the things within that is travel between China and Europe. And right now, travel between China and Europe is sitting at about 50% of where it was prior to the pandemic. And they even call this out in their most recent earnings announcement. But in my opinion, this cannot be the only thing that is affecting Estee Lauder's business. There's no way they are losing $1.5 billion over the course of a year just because travel retail is down from China. That would be a massive hit to the business, obviously, but I just don't think it is having that much of an effect. I think there are other underlying problems like increased competition, as well as probably increased inventories that are affecting not only their revenue, but also their profitability. There are also a couple of other factors that are affecting the stock price, like a change of CEO with the new CEO coming in January of 2025, as well as a recent reduction in their dividend payout. There still seems to be a lot of uncertainty around where Estee Lauder's business is headed in the future, and that's reflected in their numbers. The average EPS estimate for 2025 is $1.64. That is down almost $1 from their 2024 numbers of $2.59. They are expecting them to get back to this 2024 number in 2026. Around $2.74 is the average EPS estimate. So that is one positive, but it's still down significantly from what we've seen over the last couple of years from this business. And revenue shows a similar trend. In 2025, they're expecting revenue to fall by around 4.5% and actually pick up in 2026, growing by around 4%. That'll get them back to around $15.47 billion, which is currently where they're sitting at. So basically, they're expecting the next 2 years for Estee Lauder to be a wash in terms of their top line numbers. Because of this uncertainty, I don't think there's a whole lot of value in actually looking at valuation, but just to throw it in, their trailing PE ratio is currently sitting at 128 with a forward PE ratio of 43. So in my opinion, Estee Lauder is still not a buy, even though it's fallen so significantly. These are the type of companies that I like paying attention to that have fallen by so much from their peak, because it does offer an interesting opportunity, especially if the business is just being discounted because of things that are necessarily out of their control. But in Estee Lauder's case, I think there's probably actual weakness in the underlying business, again, due to competition, but also due to macroeconomic concerns around the world that are really affecting their business. My opinion is that there needs to be a turnaround. They need to start seeing more strength in their brands, and that needs to show up across Europe, as well as a renewed focus on the Americas, because they were seeing strong growth in the Americas, but that has since fallen, and I want to see them reinvest into the US, Canada, and Mexico to try and reinvigorate some of those markets. Right now, I'm not really seeing that from this company, and I think that's a very good opportunity for them in the future. But with all of that said, do not buy a company just because I talked about it here on YouTube. Make sure you are doing your own research and looking into companies that meet your risk tolerance as well as your time horizon. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, drop a like down below, and if you want to see more videos like this one, make sure to subscribe. And as always, guys, have a wonderful rest of your day. And for the joke of the day, what do mermaids use to wash their fins? Check the comments down below for the answer. Thanks for watching.